Good morning, and thank you for joining us on our webinar today. Let me turn my mic down here. I got a little feedback. Joining us this morning is our, let me see if I can get this right, IT Infrastructure Manager, Edward Moncur. He has been with HAR for as long as I can remember and handles not only internal management of the staff, computers and networks and things like that, but he has done a great deal of support for our members, and we are glad you're joining us today to hear a little bit more about cybersecurity and some things that you can do preventatively and to things to be aware of. And thank you, Edward, for coming and doing this today. I appreciate you being here. I'm going to turn the mic and the screen over to him. You should be seeing his PowerPoint there. We are recording this session, and so at the end, after about a day or so, it takes a bit of time to edit the video and get it posted in a format where I can send it back out to you, but I will send a recording of the video, a link to that on our YouTube channel, so you'll have the ability to watch that later as well. There is a chat feature built into the webinar. If you will just type in questions, we're going to address those at the end. Edward will take those and he'll post some contact information at the end as well. If we aren't able to get to your questions, you can always submit those by email. All right, so let me turn it over to Edward.
Good morning. Thanks, Marilyn. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this webinar session about improving your cybersecurity. I usually put cyber and data security together. They're slightly different, but there's going to be some overlap in the material that we're covering today. Cybersecurity, in short, has a lot to do with your online activity. Data security has implications for your data that may not necessarily be online, but the practices that you develop in safeguarding one typically carry over to the other. So I am the IT Infrastructure Manager at HAR. First question I get is, what does that mean? Essentially, what it it means in a daily context is that I am responsible for overseeing all of HAR's technology, with the exception of the website and the mobile app. And as you're all well aware, HAR is very forward-thinking when it comes to technology. And as we have increased our adoption and also dependence on technology, a greater portion of my day is now focused on computer security. While much of that security exists behind the scenes, it is also necessary for us here at HAR to be aware of the user-facing security issues. And as a result of that, it requires a near constant cycle of training and retraining. On this slide here, you can see if you have any questions after this presentation, cyber@har.com is the email address. You can send a quick note to me. If there's anything that is also something that you've come across that perhaps you think can be of value to members that is not addressed in this particular presentation, then please feel free to share that by email as well. I've been with HAR for about 17 years in a number of roles, but all technology related. So what are our objectives for today's presentation? Well, there are three main objectives. The first is that we don't want to panic you. We want you to come away feeling empowered. The second is that you will not become cyber experts. That's not our intention. But you will, this is the third objective, improve your cyber and data security with the adoption of just one best practice that we mention here today. So I usually tell folks that seem to be overwhelmed by the idea of incorporating security into what they do on a daily basis that, we're aiming for better. We're not going for great. So if you introduce one new thing that makes your security posture better, then that's what we go for. And then the day after that, you go for something even better. So let's start off with a fact. about bears. Did you know that bears can outrun humans? So what exactly does that have to do with cybersecurity? Well, I sometimes tell a story, sometimes inarticulately, but I tell a story of two people walking in the woods. They come across a bear, and the bear starts to chase them. To get to safety, neither has to outrun the bear, just the other guy. So while we're not making fun of bear attacks, I use it to point out that security, cybersecurity specifically, is not about being the most secure, just being more secure than the other guy. We want you to raise the difficulty level for an attacker to compromise your resources, especially those online resources. Keith Palmgren, a computer security instructor, I think sums it up a lot more succinctly than I do in my bear story. And so I'd like to give him credit for this quote. He has a series of absolute truths that he quite often references, and this is his absolute truth number one. There is no such thing as security, only varying degrees of insecurity. Uh, we're all here today at our respective workplaces, and I would imagine that we all have our homes locked and garage doors closed, and we know that the security that is used to secure our home can be overwhelmed or breached. But have you taken reasonable steps to secure your home? And so that's really what you're looking at. You're not trying to become Fort Knox. You just want to make sure that you are not opening yourself up to a crime of opportunity, or you're the low-hanging fruit for hackers. Cybersecurity is really a set of technologies, policies, and procedures that are aimed at reducing your vulnerability. 100% security is not achievable, is, in my opinion, not achievable in a typical business network. We interact with technology so much today that we take for granted that there are multiple connected computers that handle our transactions, our interactions. They process our credit cards. Um, they receive and transmit some of the most personal data or personal information about us. When they fail, I personally tend to geek out just a little bit, and I take a photo of it. And I also think of ways that it may be exploited, but from a good guy's perspective, and figuring out how it perhaps can be exploited, how you can then protect it. So the picture that we have here is a gas pump that I came across, and it crashed rather not gracefully, and we can see that it's running Windows. Here's another gas pump that is letting you know that there's a device that's been connected. So let's think of devices. Maybe a keyboard, a mouse. Is it connected to the network? Is it connected to a network that's now connected to the internet? And if it is, how may it be exploited? This is a check-in terminal at my child's former preschool. And we can see that this is running Windows, and it is actually connected to the network. So imagine that that network has, parent payment information, contact information, also certain personally identifiable bits of information that could be used to commit, identity theft and other types of cybercrime. So quite often, we interface with these devices without giving it a second thought as to the security or maybe lack of security in the background. So this is not a thing you want to see on a piece of hospital equipment. Any of you that has been running Windows for a long time knows that we call this the proverbial blue screen of death. So again, very critical pieces of equipment, very dependent on the technology, and sometimes it fails in the most public way. And then we see this. Here's a restaurant menu board that has Windows XP screensaver kicked in, and so it gave me just a little chuckle. But you have to wonder, again, are these connected to the network? Are they getting security updates regularly? And are you using, or are the companies you're interacting with using outdated or non-supported operating systems or technologies? the reality of where we are now. Security updates for your infotainment or your in-vehicle information and entertainment systems. Um, your entertainment systems can connect to Wi-Fi. Some of them will actually broadcast as Wi-Fi hotspots. Um, that opens up a whole new world of vulnerability. And just a few years ago, the threat of a car being infected with a computer virus was quite remote, but it's a very real possibility today. So let's talk more specifically about what's at risk. And before I get into what is at risk, just a side note, what is the hacker's primary objective? Um, and I think simply it can be summed up as establish contact with you or third party and extract some monetary value by the end of that communication. So every bit of data that a hacker is able to access and manipulate, they're looking to monetize some way. Obviously, we know of the traditional pieces of data, credit card numbers, personally identifiable information such as just social security numbers. We also know that online banking, including mobile banking, is a target. And we know that passwords being exploited through keystroke logging or malware or weak or reused passwords is another avenue that's quite often accessed or pursued. We don't often think about our airline rewards programs or credit card points or hotel loyalty programs where those points that you accumulated over time are, they have cash value. And so if we're using weak passwords to secure those web portals, then that creates a vulnerability that can readily be exploited and turned into cash. We also have through cloud-based payroll providers the reality that you may suffer some payroll diversion attack where you can go online, for example, and make allocations to have a percentage of your payroll directed to individual accounts online. And so there are some recent attacks that have come to light and also some issues where payroll companies have actually gone out of business. But the reality is that if a hacker can access your online portal, they can direct part or all of your payroll, for a particular pay cycle to an account that they exclusively control. We also have social media impersonation, and that is typically going to be targeting your friends lists. And obviously, I think the biggest one that affects much more broadly users and companies, their data is going to be targeted by ransomware, which is essentially software designed to encrypt or lock up all of your files and then have a hacker demand ransom in order to release those files to you. So the FBI has a division. It's called the Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, and they have compiled a number of statistics based on incidents reported to them, investigations that they've completed, and also a myriad of additional information. So this slide here is showing, if you look from the left, from 2014 all the way over to 2018, shows the number of complaints that they receive to that group, and then also the line, the top line, shows the financial losses over that period of time. So what is most interesting here, if you go over to the far right, on the top line, we can see that just in 2017 to that, well, end of 2017 to the beginning of 2018 to the end of 2018, the monetary losses exceeded 2.7 billion. That's billion with a B. So if you want to ask yourself, as many frequently do, why do hackers do what they do? Well, simply put, there's a lot of money to be made in that. And also, if you look at the trend, we can see that, 2018, there was a pretty sharp spike in the dollar losses. And so this would indicate that the attacks are becoming much more costly per incident. So in, uh, in that report, there were additional pieces of information, and there are a couple of takeaways that I wanted to highlight, which are: number one, corporate data breaches are down. Two, personal data breaches are up, and then third, the real estate related crimes are up. Business email compromise rose by about 5,000 incidents in 2018. And just so you know, real estate related wire fraud typically falls into that business email compromise category. So if we make the connection of the rise in those incidents, we can safely say that um, the number of wire fraud type emails and incidents are also rising as well. So let's talk about the cybercriminal ecosystem. And this is a slide put together by the IBM group. And many times I think um, the average person assumes that someone that is contacting them with some type of hack attempt or trying to commit some fraud is a single actor, or a handful of individuals that perhaps have minimal levels of experience or minimal reach, and that's not quite true. Cybercriminals have actually developed a global economy, and they have very specific specialties. For example, maybe you're a hacker and you decide to operate a service providing spelling and grammar check for cyber criminals who are non-native English speakers. Um, there's a service for that. There's perhaps your hacker that successfully breached and obtained a large user database containing personally identifiable information, and you have either no intention or the skills to use it, so you put it up for sale to someone else that does. Perhaps you're the type of cyber criminal that does not know how to hack a database, but your skill is in monetizing that data. Or even further, maybe you're just in the business of moving money around electronically. So, there are lots of I guess, specialists, if you will, within that cyber criminal ecosystem. It's very complex. It's international. And the spoils of cybercrime are routinely bartered and sold. So we don't want to be caught up in that statistic. So what do cyber criminals earn, and why do they do what they do? Well, it's very lucrative. So this slide here shows that individual hackers can earn around $30,000 or so for one or perhaps several jobs. But a platform manager that is offering a platform or a system for others to operate on can earn up to $2 million. So move on to the next slide. This slide is actually put together by the Ponemon Institute in conjunction with, I think, IBM. And they typically conduct surveys, and usually including at least 1,000 companies. And in their 2018 State of Cybersecurity, what they were able to determine was that over 67% of small and medium businesses experience a cyber attack, and 58% also experience a data breach. Now, the attack is just an attempt. A breach is indicative of a successful attempt where data was extracted or was not within the exclusive control of the company being attacked. So why does that matter to you? Well, let's look at some of the recent headlines here. One of the bylaws lines on this particular article uh, reinforces what we saw in that previous chart, which is 58% of cyber attack victims were small businesses. Um, the other one is a cyber attack can put you out of business because the cost of cleaning up after a breach can be considerable. And usually for small businesses, that is a cost that they cannot bear. 60% of small businesses fold within 6 months of a cyber attack. So from the time of a successful attack uh, to when the doors close, uh, a small business that has fallen victim to a successful cyber attack has about 6 months. Some additional numbers to keep in mind is that somewhere around, in excess of 180 days is the length of time that passes before most businesses that fall victim to cybercrime become aware of the actual hack. So you're hacked and you won't find out until about 6 months later. Usually that notification is through a third party like the FBI or other law enforcement. It's not typical that the business itself, through any processes or security mechanisms of their own, realize that they've been hacked. Many small businesses are just not equipped to prevent cyber intrusions and malware infections. So let's talk about compliance versus security. In this slide here, we can see that, maybe this meets the technical requirements for and it's compliant, but it's not secure. So if the requirement was to just have a locked gate on the sidewalk, you can check that box and move on, but it truly does not move the security of your organization forward. Like a weak password or unenforced policies, this photo represents, again, compliance but not true security. It's important to note that security is not an end result. It is the regular adoption and implementation of best practices and processes developed through a continued awareness of the risks facing businesses and individuals. Because that is a shared risk between the business and the individual users, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. The next slide here shows some of the top passwords. I had to cut it off at 16, but the full table is the top 25 most used passwords from the years 2011 to 2018. And I think there are many times that individual agents or individuals in general feel as though because they're not the broker, they're not the business owner, it is not their problem. Perhaps they feel that due to all the information being in the cloud, it's safe and it's someone else's responsibility. One of the top risks to cloud-based or online resources is the practice or the habit of using simple passwords, which are represented in this table, and also the habit of password reuse among or across multiple websites. You can see here that things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, combinations of letters, numbers, QWERTY, ABC 1, 2, 3, the word monkey, all appear from one year to the next. And we can see that, a lot of folks don't take security all that seriously. What they're doing is they are the low-hanging fruit because these are exposed in a database. Hackers are well aware of those, and if they're going to use a password guessing program, they're going to feed these passwords in first and just kind of spray it at a website and see what comes back. The average person has 90 passwords to remember, give or take. And the average business user, it's roughly double, so about 180 or so. As humans, we are just not wired to choose complex, quality passwords that we can remember. So what are the observable trends that we are seeing that are affecting our members? I think one of the most common is the CEO fraud or CEO gift card scam. And the premise is as follows. The CEO or president, in quotes. So someone is actually misrepresenting themselves as being someone of influence in a company, and they're going to send an email, typically indicating that they want someone that's a subordinate to complete an urgent task. That task is usually exclusively done by email or by SMS text messages. Um, the premise is that they're in a meeting. The CEO, that is in a meeting and is not able to take a call for you to do a voice verify. And ultimately, it culminates in requesting that the recipient of this message go out and purchase gift cards like iTunes or Steam, which is a gaming network, or just some of those credit card backed money gift cards or cash equivalent gift cards. So if you get pulled into a conversation, as soon as there's a mention of gift cards, then that should throw up a red flag, and you should pause before you do anything else. Remember, the ultimate objective of that hacker interaction is to monetize. So think of gift cards as cash, and if someone's asking you for cash, then you should stop and just reevaluate what you're being asked to do. So here's an example of one of those emails, and at the very top, you can see it's representing themselves as our CEO, Bob Hale. But if you look at the email is actually a Gmail address. So pretty easy to pick this one out and realize that there's something not quite right. And if we go into the body of the really brief email, I have an urgent errand. I need you to run for me. I'm in a meeting. Won't be able to pick up calls. So if you see something similar to that, then alarms and bells should be going off in your head. Further on the observable trends, we're seeing social media impersonation. Um, in this particular example, what you'd notice in the middle here that I've highlighted in red is that this is a conversation purporting to exist between two Facebook friends. This is not legitimate. In the center there, it shows that the account was recently created. So if there's someone on your friends list and you get this notification, in this case, it's a photo of our CEO, Bob Hale, but attached to someone else's name. So obviously that is, that's a red flag. Secondary to that, if you had Bob or someone else on your friends list, then um, the account notification that it's just been recently created should not come up. And if you had previously communicated with them during Messenger, there should be a history of your previous conversations. So with all those things being absent, this is an email, this is a message that you can safely ignore. If you wanted to take an additional step, you could click on this profile and go to Facebook and report it as being an impersonated account. What you don't want to do is, in this instance, someone texted and say, "Hey, buddy, your Facebook has been hacked. I just got this." A minor point for most people, but it's pretty important for IT folks. This account has not been hacked because it's a brand new account. If the account had been hacked, it would have been someone's legitimate account, and that situation would have been where they lost, control of that account to a hacker. So that's not the case here. On this next slide, we are seeing a similar attempt, but this is actually sent by text message. And this is an actual email that was received by one of our members. And you can see basically there's a conversation that's being started asking, are you working with a particular broker, with a particular real estate company? And once that's confirmed, the next step is to request Steam. Again, this is a gaming network, gift cards. And basically, once those gift cards have been purchased, they're going to want you to take a photo of any security information and card numbers, and then text with the promise of being reimbursed later today. I can tell you now, do not fall for it. Once you release that information, they are gone in the wind, and so is your money. So another observable trend that we're seeing is simply put, is extortion email scam. I won't go into the details, but basically what the premise of this is that, there's a password that someone had used on a previous website that had been breached. So the email text is going to include that password. Um, so if we look here, uh, where it says, I know the agent 174 is your password, well, that's the password that had come as a result of a previous breach. And that's to convince you that you've been compromised. And then it demands payment in digital currency, threatening to expose some private activity that is allegedly recorded if their demands are not met. So quite frequent that we're seeing out there as well. The next observable trend is this one is Amazon. Obviously, Amazon has been become very, very popular for online purchases. We're seeing a combination of phishing and social engineering scams, or maybe phishing backed up by social engineering. And in this particular instance, there's an email being sent and actually sent to a member, so some of this information has been removed. And the quick takeaway is don't fall for something like this. The most obvious reason why this is not legitimate is that you will never get a notification of or confirmation of a purchase along with a fraud alert in the same message. So if you purchase something legitimate through Amazon or any other company, yes, you will get a confirmation of your purchase, but you'll never have a fraud alert in the same message. At least I have yet to see it. If any of you have received any of these legitimately, please let me know so I can update my slide. But this is, the first red flag. The second red flag should be that the true from address is not legitimate. We can see that, that reply to address is a Gmail address. So not from Amazon, not from any other trusted source. This is just a free email that had been created by um, the perpetrator for this particular purpose. The final thing to take away from that is that don't ever call a phone number that's included with an email. You need to independently verify it. If you do business with Amazon, then you can go to Amazon, but this also, extends to your banks. Do not call a number that's included in an email that's purporting to come from your bank. Call the number on the back of your card, call the number from their website, call a number that you may have stored, but certainly do not call a number that is included here. These operations are quite sophisticated, and they have a call center specifically dedicated to fielding your call. In this instance, fortunately, after the member had contacted this phony Amazon by phone and had been prompted to go to the store and purchase a release code, which undoubtedly would have been a gift card, she thought something was suspicious and reached out to me, and then we were able to avoid her falling victim to this. So how do we improve our online security? There are just a couple of critical questions that you should ask yourself if you receive incoming communications. And first of which is, do I know the sender? If you don't know the sender, then your alert should be heightened. The second question is this normal for how the sender, if I do know them, is known to communicate? If it's uh, language that you're not familiar with, maybe they're particularly formal, they're using grammar that perhaps is not representative of how you know that person to communicate, all red flags that should cause you to pause. is this normal for what I'm being sent in terms of my job role? If I'm not, a person whose responsibility typically includes accounts payable invoices, if I'm getting an attachment that purports to be uh, an invoice, why would I even open it? So those are, just a couple of things you need to take a look at. Does the from email address or reply to email address appear to be legitimate? If it's, supposedly coming from har.com, is it an har.com domain? Or is it a Gmail or one of the free email services? Finally, just verify. Confirm that, a vendor or a customer relationship exists. Can you actually speak with them on the phone, or what we typically in the IT space call out-of-band communication? So if you reach out to me by telephone, if you reach out to me by text message or by email, then I'm going to go out of band and use a different communication method, such as telephone, in order to do a voice verify of what's being asked. So on this next slide, how do we improve our online security? The number one thing that you can do, if you do nothing else today, is to look at a password management program and implement the use of a password manager. So what does a password manager do for you? Typically, it gives you one long master password that you have to remember. So you would create that long password. Once you've created and you've memorized that long password, you can use a password manager to generate unique, strong passwords. It'll then manage passwords for you when you visit your authorized websites. Uh, it has additional features, including creating and saving secure encrypted notes. There's cross-platform support, meaning you can run it on a PC, you can run it on a Mac, you can run it on Android, or you can run it on iOS or Apple devices. And the great thing about that is that if you create a password for a website on your PC, minutes later you go onto your Apple phone and you open up the password manager app. That information is automatically transferred over. There are additional bonus features that require, for businesses that require admin staff to be able to log into certain sites, whether that's social media sites or other sites, in order to do some promotional marketing or other, work. But that staff does not necessarily have to know the passwords. This is a great feature. Admin staff, you know, that leave the company, you won't have to go and change the passwords to those sites. So you can facilitate access to those staff members while they're authorized to access these sites. They'll never know the password. They'll just log in using the password manager that you authorize them to. And that's typically available in the paid version. Question I often get is, which password management program do we recommend? HAR does not have an official position. I use LastPass, LASTPASS, and I've been using it for a while. I do have others that I use from time to time, um, and there are security risks with everything. So password manager is not perfect, but I would ask you to consider what method you're using now and if it's more secure than a password manager. Your mileage may vary, so you can make a decision as to whether that works for you. Further, in improving your online security, take a look at your advanced account settings, particularly on social media and online banking sites. There are features that are not turned on by default, but are available to you, such as notification of new sign-ins from a new geolocation. So perhaps you're here in Houston and you turn on this notifications and someone says, or you get a notification that someone has signed in from Seattle, Washington to your account. That throws up a red flag. So you can turn on some of these features that'll give you a lot more information. And based on that information, you can determine whether it's an authorized or not authorized activity and you will have some additional tools to nip any of these breaches in the bud. So the next thing to do is review your authorized devices and current logins. Typical, Facebook, for example, will show you all of your current logins, any devices you've authorized, whether it's, iOS or whether it's a PC or whether it's a Mac, it'll show current logins. And you also have this, the option to sign out any and all devices as a security measure, if you like. I'd also recommend that you review your account recovery options, such as phone number, your secondary email address, security questions that you've created. Maybe it's been several years since you've created that security question and you don't quite remember what the question and, more importantly, what the answer is. Believe it or not, it's happened quite frequently. So review those account options, because if you lose your password, account recovery is perhaps the only option that you're going to have available to you. And then use two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication, simply put, is going to be some means other than your username and password that you'd have to enter in order to successfully sign in. The most common one, perhaps, is going to be an SMS or a text message verification sent to your phone, usually 6 digits, that you'd have to enter. And, online banking, I think, all of the larger banks almost certainly push you towards that. But I'd certainly recommend that you look at using two-factor authentication wherever it's offered. How can you improve your security on social media? Review and assess your social media accounts. Part of that could be reevaluate whether your personal social media account is something you want to continue to use and accept perhaps friend requests from people you've never met, or is it time to look at a business page? And one of the reasons that this is very important is because anyone that you accept as a friend on social media, particularly Facebook, will usually have access to see who your other friends are. So if you accept friend requests from people who you've never met or from an account that perhaps is going to be, a fake account, you've basically handed, a hacker or an attacker a roadmap of all of your contacts, potentially family members and so on, and you've given them a lot more information than they would otherwise be able to gain. And you've actually subjected your friends to, those inbox messages from someone purporting to be someone else. So with that, think carefully about how you handle your friend requests from people you don't know. I know, realtors, you are in the business of meeting people. This is just a recommendation. Again, your mileage may vary, and you can determine, to what extent you want to expose your personal, Facebook site, for example. And then finally, on the social media side, take a look at your profile as just the average person that is not on your friends list, and look at what information is available globally versus just being limited to your friends list. Birth dates. Do you have, your kids' birth dates? Do you have your mother's maiden name? Do you have, a picture of the street that you grew up on? The street sign, for example. All of these are security questions or potential security questions or answers to security questions. And, if that's available globally or to just anyone in the public, that is also an increased risk. So another step, this slide here points out just a few more steps to securing yourself as you use your various devices. I would say avoid using charging devices or other people's laptops or a public kiosk or a public terminal that allows free charging, because in those cases you're actually connecting to a device that you assume is a charger, but you cannot safely say that that's all it's doing. If you connect to someone's computer, obviously you're now making a data connection, you're sharing information potentially. Um, Sometimes you're prompted, other times you're not going to be. But it's just, again, exposing, information that otherwise does not have to be exposed. Use a USB data blocker if you absolutely must. In another slide or two, I'll show you what that looks like. And in short, what the USB data blocker does for you is it establishes the power connections that you need in order to charge while severing any data connections with the device. It is a critical piece of hardware that I carry practically everywhere that I go. For the past couple of years, I don't plug in anywhere that is not, a power outlet that I brought by myself. Um, if I plug into a rental car, if I plug into a loaner car from my dealership, I always use a USB data blocker because I don't want to sync my contacts. I do not want to sync my call history. I do not want to sync my search history with a vehicle that I'm only going to have for a day or two, and you know, and then turn it in. You never know who or what is going to be in that vehicle next, and again, you're just leaving digital breadcrumbs all over the place that can come back and affect you. The next thing I'd recommend is to carry a portable battery pack. That solves a number of problems. If you just need to charge, then you don't necessarily need to use a USB data blocker. You have a portable battery pack, then that satisfies that charging requirement. And then also avoid free or public Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi can expose your online browsing sessions, such as your online banking. Social media accounts can be hijacked. There's just a litany of risks that are associated with public Wi-Fi. And when I say free or public Wi-Fi, I really mean any Wi-Fi that you connect to that does not absolutely require you to put in the network name and password before being able to view a website. In short, any airport or hotel Wi-Fi that you can connect to and you see a landing page without putting in a password, that is not secure. If you connect to it, just bear in mind you're doing so at great risk, and it's something that I strongly advise against. So here at HAR, we typically run a number of events. Our big events, we have a couple of big events every year. We have the Engage conference, and so that's coming up very shortly. And one of the things that we do at all of these larger events, because we take security so seriously, is that we typically move in and we bring a bunch of cases and a whole bunch of equipment, and we run our own secure Wi-Fi, regardless of whether the venue offers it, um, primarily because we know the risk. We don't want to expose our members to unnecessary risk, so we, at all points that we can, we tend to practice what we preach. And the final photo slide that I have here is an example of what I do when I travel. So the clock on your hotel nightstand may be very convenient. You can plug in your phone and you can charge it, but I do not do so without a USB data blocker. I'm only trying to get the power connection established. I do not want to exchange any data. We don't typically think that a hotel alarm clock can pose any risk, but can you trust it? Do you know where it came from? Maybe it didn't ship with malware, but can it host malware or viruses? So, the answer is that you simply don't know. So I always use that extra level of caution. So this slide here just goes over some resources. LastPass is the password manager that I talked about earlier. There's a website, haveibeenpwned.com. It lets you search by your email address. It'll let you know if your email address is showing up in some breached data. That would be a very, very good indicator as to whether or not your password may be exposed out there. And then you can make a determination whether you're going to change that password for any websites that use that email address. this site is quite comprehensive and will usually let you know which breach it showed up in, and so it'll give you just a little more detail that you can determine which accounts you need to go ahead and update. IC3.gov is, again, the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center. ProXPN, I didn't mention a VPN provider earlier, but they are a service that allows you to connect to a virtual private network. Why that is particularly useful is if you do have to, in some instance, connect to free public Wi-Fi, then you want to do so only while using a VPN service provider. So you can follow up on that. There are physical security tokens that you can use for two-factor authentication. Yubico is one company that provides security tokens, that I have used in the past. And then finally, on Amazon.com, the USB data blocker that we use and we recommend is called PortaPow, short for portable power. And you can just go ahead and Google that, USB data blocker, and order them up. I'd say order a couple. I usually have at least 4 somewhere nearby, and use them often and use them with great care. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation, and we're open for any questions.
All right, so I sent a message earlier through the text chat. Up in the upper right, there's a question mark that you can click on and submit any questions that you might have for Edward. Again, he gave you cyber@har.com as well, so you can email him later if you have any questions for him to address offline.
Okay, so doesn't look like there are any questions. Thank you so much for attending. Again, there's a ton of information. It's very easy to go on for even more than an hour when it comes to cybersecurity. If we go back to the objectives of the program, I'd just like to remind you that if you just take away one best practice from this presentation today, then you are actually in a much better position. If I had to make a recommendation, that simply would be to find a way to use better, more unique, strong passwords. I think, like I've said before, the password managers are not without their vulnerabilities, but it's, in my opinion, infinitely more capable of creating and maintaining secure passwords than we are able to create as humans. We're smart, but we're not that smart. So with that, thanks for attending, and feel free to reach out to me. The email address is cyber@har.com, and I'll gladly respond to you. Okay, I'm being told there's some questions, so let's see.
One question that came in, what business page is best on social media? I'm not certain I fully understand the question, but if you want to field
that question is, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but on Facebook you have the option to create, your personal, accounts, and then you also have the option to create a business page and have people like and follow that page. So I'm not a social media expert. You can, we have Christina here that actually is very good with social media, and she, I hope she doesn't kill me for this, but I'm sure she'll happily guide you through some recommendations on how to approach that. But the business page does not share nearly as much information. Your personal contacts will not be intermingled with folks that you've never met on social media.
And we again are recording this webinar session, so in the follow-up email where I send you a link to the recording, I'll include Christina's contact information and a reiteration of that means of contacting Edward. The last question we had there is if you recommend any means of storing passwords offline as opposed to one of those online password managers that you talked about earlier.
Okay, so storing passwords offline. There are some benefits to that. Obviously, there's a much more likelihood of those passwords being secure, but it comes with the drawback of not having it available when you need it. And when that happens, you're more likely to, in the instance where you need to create a password, you're going to go back to the default, which is to create a really bad password. And I think your system may fall apart. With that said, there are some people that swear by offline systems. Whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's, writing it down in a book and then securing that book somewhere, I personally can't think of a really good way to store it offline. But what I'll do is I'll look around and see if maybe there's a program that does not store it online. Now, with that said, here's where I think that is a flawed approach. Because if you have it on just one computer, if that computer becomes compromised, you lose everything. So, you know, short of going back to, paper and pen or some, non-technological means of creating and managing those passwords, uh, if it touches a computer, it doesn't matter whether it's quote unquote offline or online, so long as that computer is actually connected to the internet at some point in time, your risk is higher. I think, uh, just to kind of, follow up on that, most security professionals use some sort of password management program. So, I think the time is we're past the prime point where most people should be using password managers, because what they're using up to this point does not work. We can see from 2011 to 2018, people reuse passwords, they create weak passwords, and 9 times out of 10, that puts you in a significantly higher risk than the risk of you ever being compromised using a password management program. Again, that's my opinion. I'll try to find some statistics to back it up. But the low-hanging fruit is passwords like 1234566, monkey, QWERTY. If you were to bring it even down to a level of, if I wanted to guess the top passwords in the realtor community in Houston, I'm going to go with Clutch City, Bayou City. I'm going to go with, number one
Astro.
realtor, top agent, Astro. So all of these keywords, again, they seem neat at the time when you create the password, but they are significantly increasing your risk of being compromised online.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Sandra, for that. Appreciate it. Also, do you have a recommendation for protecting USB drives, those external little thumb drives maybe that we take and use?
Oh, great question, Richard. So data security is, how do you manage your data once you've yeah, aggregated it? And one of the greatest risks to data security is the portability of data. You plug in a USB drive and you copy a spreadsheet or you copy a text file or anything of that nature, and you walk around with it in your pocket, and maybe it falls in a parking lot, it falls, in an airport lobby. Um, your data is now outside of your control. It wasn't hacked, but it's certainly not secure. So to answer your question, Richard, the easiest way to secure your data is going to be, if you're using Windows. Windows has an encryption built into it. On Windows 10, you can actually click on the drive and use BitLocker. It's an encryption technology that Microsoft makes pretty straightforward. I think it's by far the easiest to use. If you're on a Mac, I'm drawing a blank, but Mac has the ability to also encrypt. And if you didn't want to encrypt the entire drive, you can use a program like 7-Zip, the number 7, Z like zebra, I like India, P like Peter. 7-Zip has the option that you can create an encrypted archive. And really all it is going to be is an encrypted zip file with a password. And I've used that actually in instances where I was closing, and the mortgage company, would sometimes use an encrypted portal, other times they would not. whenever they opted to have me send documents attached to email, I encrypted it using 7-zip first, and then contacted them by phone to tell them what the passcode was. But excellent question.
All right, so how often should you change your passwords will be our last question.
Okay, Diana, great question. So there used to be uh, a set of standards for password complexity and then also frequency of rotation of passwords and also the history of those passwords. I think a lot of people in academia, they've conducted some studies, and it has been determined that shorter password refresh cycles leads to more uh, simple passwords being chosen, and it ultimately increases everyone's risk. So it used to be 90 days. There are still some organizations that insist on 90 days. If you think about a passphrase as opposed to a password, uh, we want it to be as long as possible, something that someone can't guess, and something that is easily remember. You can put together for yourself and recall it. Then you can push that frequency of password management out. So with your master password, if you were to use a password manager, um, I'd say, 6 months, even a year if it's an absolutely strong password. Once you're using a password manager, um, you know, it just depends on what your comfort level is. But when you have really, really complex passwords and strong passwords, typically you want to aim for 12 to 14 characters or more, and that increases the difficulty level for anyone that's trying to hack your password. Um, and then you can push it out. But I'd say easily a very strong password. I would say a minimum of 6 months. Even longer. I have passwords that I've used even longer because of the complexity that I've used, and I'm comfortable with that. Uh, Final thing is that a password manager will actually compare all of your passwords and give you a rating on what the strength is. And based on that, it'll suggest a new password for you and then automatically apply it to the relevant websites if you wish. So again, I think that's all the questions we have time for. We're actually at 58 minutes and 49 seconds. So we're fresh out of time. Um, Thanks so much for attending. Again, cyber@har.com. Feel free to email me with any questions that you have. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you for your wonderful information.